Welcome to the 10th anniversary of REIMAGINE 2021. Presented by Mousebelt. Coming up next.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to REIMAGINE 2021 version 10. So this is our 10th edition anniversary event. We've been doing these virtual conference events for the past year now. And we're bringing you the latest founders, the latest innovators, and up-to-date news in the space. I'm Roshan Mirajkar. I'll be your host for this event. I'm very excited to bring you a new guest here. So with me here today, I have Manasi Vora, who's the VP of Strategy and Operations at Skynet. Manasi, welcome to the show. And I think it's great that you're here. And to get started, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into crypto.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk all things science Skynet today. So kind of my background, I'm an engineer by education, but most of my career, I've worked in the traditional finance and the banking world, the world that we hate right now in the crypto space. But through that career, I stumbled upon Bitcoin in 2016, 2017. That was the time that there was demonetization that happened in India. So I'm originally from India. I've been living in the US for the last 10 years. But I was watching all of the things that are happening back home. For people who don't know what demonetization was, it essentially, the government overnight decided certain denominations of currencies are not valid anymore. And that caused a lot of economic, social shock to the Indian society. And that's kind of the first time I started thinking about what is money, because we take a lot of these concepts just for granted. Like money works, monetary system works. We don't think about it till a major event like that happens. And that was my pivotal moment, starting to think about who controls money, what our monetary policies look like, and just naturally stumbled upon Bitcoin as an alternative form of money, and fell down that rabbit hole like everyone else in the crypto space. Luckily for me, I live in the Boston, Cambridge area and found a really good community at MIT to learn about this technology together. So worked on different projects there. I did some research at the MIT Media Lab Digital Currency Initiative, was the director for the MIT Bitcoin Expo, and just realized that what I was doing in the traditional banking finance wasn't as interesting as what we are trying to do here with like building this new ecosystem of not just finance but like social interactions. And made the leap with Skynet, which is where I currently work.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially your story of like how you kind of experienced censorship. And yeah, I'm from India as well, so I totally can relate to what you're saying. Tell us a little bit more about what exactly is Skynet and what are some of the problems that you're trying to solve right now?
Yeah. So to talk a little bit more about Skynet, I would want to go back to talking about Saya. And Saya was founded around in 2013, 2014. And the idea with Saya back then and even now is, with Bitcoin, how we are trying to create a system where individuals are in control of their money. We wanted to do that with data, and data is super valuable, especially in today's world and like the digital world that we live in. So we wanted to create kind of a infrastructure solution where instead of any individual or company storing their data on a centralized provider like Amazon or Google, you would be utilizing the strengths of blockchain technology to store that data in a manner that it's completely in your control. Completely, you decide who has access to it, who doesn't have access to it, how that data is stored, how that data is split across, different nodes around the world. So that was kind of the biggest motivation for the founders to launch Saya. And with Saya, you could do a lot with like data storage, but you couldn't do a lot in terms of moving that data on the web. And that's when we launched Skynet last year, early 2020. So Skynet's kind of a layer two on Saya, which is the layer one. And Skynet enables all of that data that's stored on this decentralized protocol to be shared with friends. And what that means is now you can store, similar to like Dropbox, where you store your data, you have a link that gets generated. And you can share that link with your friends. It's the same Web 2 experience, but in the Web 3 world. And it goes beyond data because you can also host applications in the same manner. You can upload your HTML file, all your application data, and it's completely hosted on this decentralized infrastructure layer. So that's what Skynet is. Skynet is the decentralized storage infrastructure and decentralized web hosting infrastructure for Web 3.0.
Yeah, that's actually really exciting, especially as we move away from the client server model that everybody's used to. That's kind of what everything is built on. That's the way I kind of see it. Even the banking infrastructure, it's kind of the same client server model. You're not really in control of it yourself. So in today's day and age where Facebook just hit over $1 trillion valuation, what do you think it will take for the mass adoption of people to kind of transfer over to user-owned data and applications?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think the early adopters for technologies like Bitcoin and decentralized storage are people who are really philosophically aligned, people who truly care about privacy, people who truly care about owning and controlling their own data. But that's kind of the small segment, right? There's not a lot of people are actively thinking about how their data is currently mined or how Facebook is kind of profiting on top of the user data. And so for that, for us to bridge the gap between the early adopters and reaching mass adoption, we need a lot more user-friendly applications to be built on top of these decentralized protocols. And that's kind of our biggest focus since the launch of Skynet is we've built this really strong foundational technology and underlying infrastructure. Now, how do we enable developers to leverage all of this infrastructure to build true user-facing applications? And we've started to see, some of that come out already in the last 6 months. We've had, decentralized blog being built on Skynet. We have a really cool decentralized Twitter application built on Skynet, decentralized Reddit, and you're seeing just like a lot of explosion in like the social media space, especially since early in the year we saw a lot of censorship in the centralized social media places. People started to think about what who really has control on what we see on Twitter. Our feeds are completely controlled by Twitter's algorithms. So I think that change in kind of thinking is coming along, but we also need a lot more UI UX, thoughtful UI UX for mass adoption.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You mentioned a lot of those issues. I think it's getting solved right now. And one of the things I was thinking about as well is, as you guys enable more people to come online around the world, maybe fighting through the censorship they're currently facing, do you think the social media side of it will be disrupted first, or do you think these people will use DeFi applications and finance applications first?
I mean, from our perspective, we would love to see disruption on the social media side of things, but I think it is a lot more complicated than kind of the DeFi primitives. So um, just giving you a little more insight in terms of why it's complicated, because decentralized social is not just decentralized storage. It is also how do we do decentralized identity? How do we build multiple like decentralized compute layer? How do we have social graph, which is basically what Facebook and Twitter is like, having your followers, having your history of content. And so there are multiple layers in terms of building this like decentralized social solution. And I think we are still in the stages of like stacking them up. And we're definitely getting there, but I think DeFi has definitely taken over the conversation for the time being.
Yeah, and I think a large part of the reason why it kind of boils down to incentives. There's a huge incentive to, build the next pool or, connect people to yields all around the world who are currently like suffering from hyperinflation. How can things like the Skynet content leaderboard and other incentives kind of reshape how people will interact? Like how can that, you think that can, you think things like that can disrupt Facebook and the other web 2.0 conglomerates?
100%, 100%. I think that's where we are trying to right now. We are working through the concept of content monetization, and again, like what I said, Twitter, Facebook currently are data silos where a lot of the work is actually done by users. Right? Twitter is nothing without the influencers or people tweeting and actually creating content. So a lot of the work of like creating content, building your network is done by individuals, but none of the profit is seen by these content creators. Everything like the value extraction happens at Twitter or the Facebook level. As opposed to in a decentralized world, what we are trying to enable is how do individual creators, how do these influencers earn money directly um, from people that follow them, from people who want to support them, and that's kind of the big incentivization piece that we are currently working on. So giving a little more context, like the entire Saya network runs on money. And what that means is all of the data that is stored on Saya has to be paid for. All the data that gets uploaded, downloaded has to be paid for. So there is an economic layer that is baked into the Saya blockchain. And now to build on top of that, like every time if someone consumes, say you created a blog and you used a few photos created by other creators, how do people, when they consume your blog, and how can they support it, how can they pay for that blog? But not just that, it goes beyond that. The money that you are earning from the blog also gets distributed to the components of your blog, which is that if you're using photos from other creators, they also get benefited by someone consuming your blog. So this like recursive kind of content monetization concept is something that we are excited about, and should be launched in the next couple of months.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting, I think. And while you were talking about that, it made me think of another thing. So how does all of this affect things like regulation and a lot of the, I guess, privacy requirements? Like it's privacy preserving, but how do you think this will disrupt things like KYC and all of the regulation around the world?
Yeah, so I would say Saya is privacy preserving. Skynet is all about public data. So what I mean by that is when you store data on the Saya network, everything's encrypted by default. It's completely private unless you decide not to encrypt it. And all of that data is just private to whoever owns the keys to that data. As opposed to Skynet, when you put, the model for Skynet is public because we want to enable social applications, and social applications, the default is you want to share that data with a larger group. And that group can be, just your friends, but also can be just general public at large. So that's kind of the distinction when we talk about privacy. That's not to say that data on Skynet cannot be private. You can use encryption keys and encrypt your data before you store anything on Skynet. Hopefully that clears kind of the distinction between kind of how we are thinking in terms of privacy.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So what are some of the applications or use cases that can be built on Skynet, and you think it can't be replicated as efficiently on maybe a Twitter or Facebook?
Yeah, I think the biggest benefit of kind of this open data model is, like I mentioned, all of the work, say I'm a small business owner. I've built kind of my Facebook social profile. I've created this group where my users are following me. I have created content over a period of time. I'm engaging all of my users through whatever products I'm selling. Tomorrow, if I decide I do not enjoy or I do not want to kind of continue my relationship with Facebook, their privacy policies are changing, I do not agree with it, I want to take all of that reputation and all of that content I've built outside of Facebook. That's not possible. You're basically locked into that silo. You cannot take your followers with you. You cannot take your content with you. As opposed to in a decentralized model, which is what we are building, use the data that you created is associated with your user key, which means if you build that over a X application, and you suddenly decide you don't want to use that application anymore, that data is not locked into that application. You can, with your user keys, all of that data can be migrated to another application. And I think that's the biggest benefit, where in the future, I'm sure people will wonder why we lived in a siloed world where your videos that you created on TikTok can only be shared on TikTok and not across the entire web. I think that unlocks a lot of interesting innovation, where you can create a lot of interesting applications that don't need to live in a particular application, can just move across various applications. So similarly, how in DeFi we think about financial or money Legos, here we are thinking about like data Legos, and how can you just stack one thing over the other and create really rich social applications.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting, especially when you think about a lot of the value in Web 2.0 is the fact that they can query mass amounts of data, and they can get the state of really anything they want very quickly. And I think in what you all are building, you can't exactly do that. You might need indexers and other things like that, but I think it's a better structure. So when you talk about decentralized identities, what is kind of the vision that you and your team see? Do you see this as just everyone just adopting like an open source decentralized identity? That's something you guys are building, or do you think that private government might try to issue it first?
Yeah, I know that's a good question. So when we are talking about decentralized identity and something that we launched called MySky, again, the goal is that your user keys control all of your social profile, but also control all of the data that's associated with you. And there are various ways of approaching this, but what we are trying to enable is that you can log in using any of the existing centralized solutions. If you want to log in with your Google or Gmail, you can still do that. If you want to log in with Facebook, you can still do that. If you want to log in with MetaMask, that's an option. So you can pick and choose if you want to log in with like a centralized or a decentralized solution out there. But the whole idea is that no matter what you use, your underlying data and your profile is controlled by you and associated with your private key. And what that enables is like now you don't have to, create an account on every single application you use on the web. Right now, we go to different websites, we have to create new accounts on each website. As opposed to in this decentralized model, you just have a single login and that just works across all applications. So I think that's also super exciting in terms of reducing user friction, because now you don't have to like remember hundreds of different passwords or reuse silly passwords and get hacked. whereas you are using really strong cryptographic keys to log in to, just one account that rules it all.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems easier, but you never know with the way some people are still setting their passwords, and now we're talking about keeping a 12-word phrase safe. Or I'm glad that some of them have things like Face ID, and there's also some things like BlockFi, just for comparison. Like they have like ACH payments and everything. So I'm a big fan of that too, when two things fuse together. But even looking forward, I want to go back to one of the things you mentioned before, which was the monetary aspect of it. So, in these traditional companies, there's, they're making use of our data, but they're still covering all the costs for, application maintenance and different things like that. So, in a network like Skynet, who covers the monetary cost, and what do you think is the future of that?
Yeah, we've taken a very different approach. Right now, if you are a developer and you deploy an application, you have to make, and if it goes viral overnight, you have to bear all of the server costs, all of the infrastructure costs that's needed. In our model, it's, you as a developer don't have to worry about the server costs at all. You can create an application, deploy, and like forget about it. Who's paying for all of that is basically users. So anytime a user wants to access any file on Skynet, they are the one who's responsible for the costs that are associated with that file, with that application. And currently how it works is we have something called as accounts on Skynet. So there are Skynet portals, which are basically gateways that allow you to access data that's stored on the SIA network. And these portals have accounts, and accounts is pretty similar where you can have a free account and your data will only last for around 90 days. There are no long-term guarantees. The speeds are slower, but you can just, it's a freemium model. You can pay, $5 a month, which is a subscription fee, and get access to all of the content that's on Skynet, and faster speeds, and you can store up to 1 terabyte of data. So we flipped the model. It's not the developers or the application creator who has to bear the cost of like the server and the infrastructure in this decentralized world. If you have users, and if those users really care about what you've built and really find that valuable, they are the ones who will be paying to maintain and keep that application alive, or keep that content alive.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of, even things like Bitcoin, the fact you have multiple parties all around the world kind of supporting the network, and they get a monetary incentive. So I think that kind of circular network or circular economy really works. And I kind of see that in what you guys are building too. It's like all the parties are getting rewarded. But when it comes to things like intellectual property, um, when do you think there'll be a shift for, I guess, what these companies, these media companies who, they're trying to exhibit more and more control? Do you think there'll ever be a shift where they start to decentralize more of their companies?
I think we're already seeing that with NFTs, with DAOs, where companies are kind of taking themselves out of the picture, and just giving control directly to creators and to users that are using those creations. I think we still have a long way to go in terms of like fully taking all of that like IP model out of the picture, but I think we are definitely on that path. I'm excited to see, what comes out of this and how, DAOs evolve for sure. But within kind of this kind of model, like I said, everything's public. However, any content that you've created has a key associated with it, which has your, how much you want to charge for that content. And no matter, if you disappear, or no matter what happens, anytime someone accesses that piece of content, it's by default you are going to get paid for it. So that's just part of like the software.
Yeah, I mean, there was a period of time when encryption was illegal here in the US, and the cypherpunk movement, and people even tried to create things like LimeWire, decentralized music stores that maybe was ahead of its time, but now, all the innovation is happening there. I totally agree with you, decentralizing more things. And there's a lot more education that's needed for people to even understand why they would want to do that. So I quickly want to cover that from your perspective as well. Like, what are maybe the top three benefits you see of like controlling your data and even your keys? What do you think that really gets you in the end?
Yeah, I think from Saya's perspective, a lot of our early users really cared about privacy. This is basically public knowledge that the data that you store on Dropbox or Google Cloud, it's actively being mined. You don't really have the full privacy that you get when you are using a solution like decentralized storage. So that's kind of the number one benefit. But also, I think number two is just censorship resistance, right? Um, a lot of these platforms, let's take the example of YouTube. You put in a lot of hours, you create content, and then suddenly YouTube decides your content is not according to their policies, and without any notice, your content is taken down. And that has happened, and it has also happened in the crypto space. We've seen a lot of crypto content being pulled down from YouTube over the last few months. So I think censorship resistance is a big component. Like if you put in hours and energy behind creating content, no one can kind of take it down from this decentralized layer. Definitely, if there are UIs and communities where moderation can happen, and it can go away from kind of the front end, which is what, even on Skynet, there are different portals that are run, and our portal, we run a portal, community members run a portal. We can choose what we display on our portal, but that doesn't block the content from like the Saya network. It's just the interface that kind of decides to moderate how content is displayed. So I think censorship resistance is like definitely a big benefit of decentralized storage.
Yeah, I think those are all great tips and a great outline. And it's pretty important in today's day and age. I think in the past, it was always something that I think was advertised as a feature, but now we actually see different regions all around the world where things like hyperinflation and other things, that are left unchecked, and then suddenly the citizens, can't even express themselves. So it's kind of one of the last things I wanted to ask you. Have you guys
Yeah,
experienced
before
any specific? Yeah, go ahead.
before that, actually a good use case just I want to point out here. So there's an organization called Reporters Without Borders. Basically, they do reporting around the world, especially in countries where censorship is a big problem. And they had launched, um, I don't know if you had seen this, a Minecraft version of like a decentralized, not a decentralized, but censorship resistant library. So there are books,
Oh yeah,
certain
yeah.
books that are banned across the world, across not across the world, across certain countries. So a way that they kind of got around that system was they created a Minecraft version where they posted these books, and that was a really clever way of kind of navigating kind of censorship around reporting and journalism. But the content was hosted on Skynet, and that's a really good example of like how we supported Reporters Without Borders, and I'm super proud of like being able to support a cause like that.
Wow, I had read about that and I kind of explored it before. I had no idea it was hosted on Skynet. That made me all the more excited. No, that's actually really awesome. And Yeah, so what do you guys kind of see as your role just now, like knowing this now in this moment, and just for the future, like what do you guys kind of see your role in I guess is it more about getting more people to adopt identities and coming on the network, or would you guys are you guys kind of open to like new submissions, maybe new decentralized projects that might make the world a better place? You guys are definitely going to make, I'm sure you guys have had people out there who don't want these things to be decentralized, like enemies or something like that.
Yeah, no, that's that's something that we are actively thinking about, and I think the answer is kind of two-pronged. One is yes, we do want to expose this technology, that there is a possibility that you can live without the control of the Googles and the Amazons of the world, and you can have full control over your own data. So we do definitely want to grow in terms of like retail adoption, where individuals have access to this decentralized technology and can benefit from all of the good things that come out of it. The other component, and I think something that is pretty ironic in the crypto space, is we call dApps, which is decentralized applications. But if you actually look at it, a lot of them are storing their data on AWS or hosting their front end on Google Cloud, or something on those lines. Even DeFi applications like have their front ends hosted on a centralized platform somewhere. Take the example of NFTs, where the underlying data or like the art itself is stored somewhere on a centralized platform, and that platform, if they decide to kind of shut it down, the entire dApp ecosystem can come crushing down. So that's, I think, another focus where we, truly want to move these dApps to being hosted on Skynet, being, storing their data on Skynet, for NFT platforms to store these art pieces on a decentralized storage protocol. So I think, that's kind of the two directions that we are going in. Like, how do we enable individuals to take control over their data, and how do we enable the crypto ecosystem to be truly decentralized and don't have any kind of single points of failure?
Yeah, definitely. And for those of you watching, definitely go back and rewatch what Mansi just said, because she said everything she said is definitely all true, and a lot of the things that still need to be fixed in the crypto space. Like a lot of things are being advertised, and if you really check, I mean, the same. We don't want the same risks as the centralized finance system before, and how these companies are structured. It's completely different incentive structures. So even when we're talking about regionally, is there any regions, I'm just curious, that Skynet particularly targets, like for growth? Like in your view, do you think that there's any regions that right now could benefit more than others from this technology?
Yeah, I think, definitely there are parts of the world where censorship and data privacy is a bigger challenge than other parts of the world. But currently, in terms of what we've seen usage, so we recently crossed 1 million monthly active users, which is a big milestone for us. And we are super excited to be, yeah, touting that as kind of our user base. But we definitely have seen over the years a lot of usage just coming out of Europe. I think Europe has historically just been ahead of the curve with GDPR, which is like the residents being more cognizant of like privacy and thinking about their data laws. So currently, as of the network sense, our biggest users are in Europe, and then the second biggest users are in US. But I would love to support emerging markets. I would love to support kind of any other use cases around the world. It's a completely global decentralized network. Anyone can access it from anywhere. There's no geographical restrictions. So the host or the data providers on the SIA network, we have hosts on almost every continent except Antarctica. Hopefully one day we'll have a host that's based out of there as well. But for now, I think it's pretty much spread across the world.
Yeah, congrats on the million users milestone for sure. I mean, I want to sign up for sure. I can add to that. But yeah, it was great having you on the show, Mansi. And lastly, how can people get in touch with you and even the Skynet project?
Yeah, I would highly recommend everyone just to go to sayasky.net and try out the uploader. It's so seamless. It does not feel like you're using a Web3 application. It's drag and drop. You can upload your files. You quickly get a link to that file or folder or application that you have uploaded, and you can share it with friends. You can come back and look at all of the data that you've uploaded. So we've created a really seamless like Web2 experience, but with all of the benefits of Web3. So for people who are interested in Skynet, I highly recommend checking that out. In terms of finding me, I'm super active on Twitter. So I am Manasi Vora, Manisilvora on Twitter. And you can also find Skynet Labs, which is our official Twitter handle. And then I would lastly also plug, beyond Skynet, I'm really passionate about diversity in the crypto space, and something that, as I was transitioning from the traditional world to the crypto space, I realized we're trying to build this new financial model, but we are repeating some of the same mistakes of the traditional world in terms of diversity, having more women in the space, having more people of color in the space. And that was kind of my biggest motivation to start a nonprofit called Women in Blockchain, which I've been working on for the last few years. And our mission there is to increase diversity, but also break down barriers to entry. So through various educational initiatives, through workshops, and most recently we launched an investment DAO, which basically is to fund female founders. So we raised funds and now we are deploying. So if there are any female founders in the crypto space who are fundraising, we would love to chat with you. So a quick plug at the end that, yeah, I'm really passionate about diversity in the space and would love to chat if you're interested both in Skynet, but also talking about women in blockchain.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that. And I guess we're going to have you on the show again to learn more about all the DAOs that you're building. That's super exciting. So thanks for all of your contributions and work to the space.
Thank you so much for having me, Roshan. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you. And for the rest of you that are still watching, we're bringing you more interviews here at Reimagine 2021 version 10. And I encourage everyone to check out our YouTube library. We have over 500 interviews now. And, I'm your host as always, and I'll let you all enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.